All right, so we're going to kind of just pick up right where we left off with kind of the board prep section of all this. There's not a lot that I have much to tell you, except that we're just going to kind of talk about different ways to prep and kind of how to go about it. So, first, kind of off is just a disclaimer. This is kind of an interest of mine. Uh, so, it doesn't mean it has to be your interest, and that's very understandable. Also, this is mainly predominantly how I prepared, not how 100 other people prepared. Um, and we're all just a little different. So how I do things will be a little different than how you do things. And I encourage you to be different because we all learn differently and that sort of thing. Of note, once again, this being my interest, I remember I had an attending tell me one time that he wouldn't waste any more time than he had to on a board exam because it didn't mean anything as long as you could pass it. So, there are multiple different viewpoints. You don't have to have the same viewpoint that I do, but if you want to do well, I think I can help you get there, and that's kind of what this is for. Also, this is how I prepared, but I did do a lot of research on it. I've been kind of studying how to study since college, so I think I can at least prepare you a little bit and just point you in the right direction. Is kind of the way I would kind of akin it to. So, and then so we're gonna have to kind of make some assumptions as we kind of go through this, and because we're doing this talk and I'm talking about trying to do well on board exams. My primary assumption is that you want to do well on your board exam, not just well. You want to do very well, and with doing very well, you have to kind of remember one thing and one thing only. If I had to tell you one thing to remember, and that would be just to set a goal. Um, and by set a goal, I mean it can't be like this imaginary goal that you think, oh, I want to make a 700 on the Comlex, and but you're not willing to do anything to try to make a 700. You made a 450 last time, and your goal is to make a 700, but then you're going to do the exact same thing you did to make the 450. You have to realize that you know that won't work. Something must change. So once again, you got to set a goal, and for it to be legitimate, you have to be willing to make sacrifices to make it work. And if you're willing to do that and actually set a goal, I encourage you to write the goal down. So you're going to write the goal down, and you're going to look at it every day. You want to make a 663, and you're going to look at it every single day. And it needs to be an exact number, and it needs to have an exact date attached to it. Why does it need to have these exacts? It actually, makes us realize that there's a finite amount of time, and that there is a finite goal. If you just say you want to make greater than a 600, that's kind of hard to compute. What greater than a 600 is. You want to do greater than a 600, but what does it take to be greater than a 600? You're better off and more likely to reach your goal if you put like a 623 or 663 or 732. And there's research that backs all that, and you can look it up. But that's kind of the gist behind it. I haven't done a ton of these yet. These little video casts, which all y'all know. But the thing is, I embedded videos into this one, so we're going to watch some videos, and hopefully they'll kind of play through it, and we'll just kind of see how they go. So here's the first one.
Paul, I think it's time I told you something I should have told you a long time ago.
Okay.
The secret ingredient of my secret ingredient soup.
Oh.
Come here. The secret ingredient is nothing.
Huh?
You heard me. Nothing. There is no secret ingredient.
Wait. It's just plain old noodle soup? You don't add some kind of special sauce or something?
Don't have to. To make something special, you just have to believe it's special.
There is no secret ingredient.
All right, so why did I include this video in this movie? This is actually my favorite movie. So Kung Fu Panda, that's probably my favorite quote of all time. Is there is no secret ingredient. I actually have that quote plastered on my desk in front of me. And the reason I have that quote just plastered there, and the reason this is in here, and it's not necessarily for the believe part. I'm a big fan of believing. I am a believer, and I do believe in Jesus Christ, and those type of things. But that is not why that video is in there. This video is in there for the no secret ingredient statement. I can't spell, but that was supposed to be secret. the no secret ingredient basically is just stating that there's no one thing I can tell you that's going to make this happen. It happens over time through lots of hard work, and then to kind of shuttle off that, let's look at this guy. We can all know that he didn't lift weights for one weekend, for 1 month, or for 2 months out of the year one time. He lifted weights for basically his entire life to look like this. And the same goes for this lady. She didn't eat one too many pieces of cake. She ate a few too many pieces of cake too many times. So once again, it's not the single episode. It's not the single time of you studied really hard for 2 months. It's the you studied a lot every day for years. And if you did this for a year, I believe that we can get this thing to work. And that's kind of how at least I've approached it. And just like everything else in life, if it's something that you truly believe is worth achieving, then it's not going to be something that comes easy. And you actually don't want it to come easy, because that means you didn't get much out of it. So once again, the small daily choices, and just kind of add up over time. And that's basically what this quote means to me. And that's kind of how I approached everything else from here. So now we're going to kind of talk about some misconceptions that you'll see with board exams. And some of these apply more to step 1 than they do to step 2. But you'll see what I'm talking about. So you did well in your classes, and it's the actually best studied fact, that doing well in your classes is the best indicator of how you'll do on the actual COMLEX. And since you did well in your classes, that you'll be fine for the COMLEX, and you don't have to study. The only problem with this misconception is that you really just can't learn exactly how to take a board exam, how to answer board exam questions just based off of classroom work. If you can, then that means you have a really good medical school, or at least really good question writers at your medical school. So you're going to have to study some on your own. This is a lot bigger in residency than it is in medical school. And the reason is, in residency, you take care of patients every day, and you get pretty good at taking care of patients by the time you're about halfway through your second year, into your third year. And you think, oh, well, I'm good at taking care of patients, so I should be good at this exam. And the thing is, you just don't see it all. And the same goes for the COMLEX and the USMLE. I feel like the USMLE Step 1 was like the broadest stroke of knowledge that you had to, kind of comprehend. It could, same thing for COMLEX Step 1 or Level 1. They could really legitimately ask you, felt like a question on anything, and expect you to know it. Now, I know there was finites to it, just like there's finites to everything, but anyway, just doing well in your classes is not quite enough. You're going to have to kind of study outside of that. Going on from there, all I need to do is read textbooks or review books, and I should do well on the COMLEX or the USMLE. And the reason here is, I mentioned in class the other day that I didn't like reading so much. I felt like it was poor yield, and we'll talk about exactly why in a little bit. But basically, it's just the fact that there needs to be something that is besides reading. So it needs to be some kind of form of spaced repetition. And the spaced repetitions needs to be in the form of basically memory retrieval. And then we'll kind of talk about that as well. So memory retrieval, and that's just basically like answering questions is a good way to do that. So questions, and that's something I talked about the other day. So from going on from there, all I need to do is work practice questions, and I'll do great on board exams. I felt this way for a while, at least kind of toward the end of my 4th year of medical school, and even into the beginning of residency, that all you need to do is work questions, and if you worked enough questions, you should do okay. The only problem with this is that I've realized that for questions to be the most effective, that there needs to be at least a pretty good baseline knowledge or pretty good background knowledge. And if you look at those little charts they used to say how to study for step 1 and step 2 and stuff like that. I remember it being like a kind of book related on the front end, and then more question related on the back end. And the way they would kind of draw the graph is something like this, where at the beginning, you would have a lot more book work with a few questions, and then at the end it was a lot more questions with a little bit of book work. So you have to get to this point for questions to really be effective. If you're stuck down at this point trying to just work questions, the questions can kind of just turn into like spot knowledge, which is just kind of like you're almost memorizing a fact. And if you can't tie it to anything, you won't ever hold on to it forever. So there needs to be background knowledge. And this is when I talk about reading if you don't understand. So let's say you are working a question, and let's say in the question you get to an answer choice that you don't understand. So you're confused, you don't know anything about it. The first thing I would do is go to my review book. So you're going to go to your review book, and you're going to see if you can find that information. You're going to read there. Your review book might not give you enough information that would have actually given you the answer to the question. And in that case, you just mark that spot in your review book. And then this is where you remember review books, and then there are other books for content. Content books are going to be like Mayo, like the Mayo Internal Medicine book that we go through here. Harrison's, that's going to be a content book. Cecil's is another content book. Most of our medical schools have provided us with like an online resource. Access Medicine is one of them. So what I would advise you to do is first you go to your review book, you see if it's there. If you can't find it there, maybe you have Access Medicine or some other form of electronic, searching source, and then you go there and you see if you can find it. If you can't go there, just Google it. Put it in Google and see what you can find, and you'll probably find something. You'll probably find enough information to provide you with the answer that you need, and kind of go from there. So remember, review books are review books. They're just to review content. Remember, you need to have also a set of kind of all-inclusive books that you can get your hands on. You don't have to actually have these personally. A lot of these can be found as PDFs online, but just that's kind of how the reviewing of a question should go if you don't understand the material. And remember that just working the questions alone, if you don't have enough background info, you can kind of run into a fallacy there. So another one is I did poor on standardized, or I'm poor standardized test taker, so there's no way I can do good on the complex studio assembly. I know I definitely felt this way, kind of starting out. I told you I did sub-average, or below the national average on the ACT and the MCAT. And to just let y'all know, I made a 21 on the ACT, and then I made a 25, I believe, on the MCAT. So yeah, once again, didn't kill it. Didn't kill it at all. So that being said, how have I been able to do better on board exams? And a board exam is what I like to kind of call like applied knowledge. And so what do I mean by applied knowledge here? That means that you actually have to know it to be able to apply it. So if you don't ever know it, then you can't ever apply it. And by that I mean, it's not like an IQ test. You actually have to go study and read it, and then you have to be able to apply it. Now this does require a little practice, but this right here is just your ability to go obtain information and remember it and learn it. So that's how I feel like I've been able to do a little better on medicine board exams. It's just kind of through applied knowledge as opposed to what I call like an IQ test or the MCAT, which is your ability to abstract from formulas and stuff like that a little more, and those type of things. But anyway, I remember once again this is how I used to feel, and I ran across this video from Tosh.0, and I remember I initially thought that he just didn't understand, but in all reality, I think he did understand. And anyway, it's just kind of funny, and here it is real quick.
Good. Don't you love it when people in school are like, I'm a bad test taker? You mean you're stupid? Oh, you struggle with that part where we find out what you know? No, I can totally relate. See, because I'm a brilliant painter, minus my god-awful brushstrokes. Oh, how the masterpiece is crystal up here, but once paint hits canvas, I develop Parkinson's.
Anyway, with that being said, I remember I used to feel this way. I used to feel that, I was a poor test taker, and I remember when I first saw this video, I was like, I laughed, but I was offended. And my thought was, well, he just doesn't, understand, and he doesn't know how hard they are, and those type things. But, the thing is, these can be prepared for, and, you once again, the applied knowledge is kind of where I feel like a lot of us don't, we kind of count ourselves out before we even get started. And, counting yourself out before you get started is like the best way to fail ever. And, you'll never achieve what you could achieve if you believe that you could achieve it the whole time, which that kind of goes to that believe part of the, the no secret ingredient video. But anyway, so, just don't count yourself out and actually give it a shot, and, you might impress yourself. Going from there, you did poorly on the MCATs. There's no way you can do well on the USMLE. And this kind of just goes back to what I said earlier. They're different exams. I feel like the MCAT was a little more abstract, and the COMLEX and the USMLE more applied knowledge, and they can be succeeding. And then once again, you did poorly on level 1 or step 1, so there's no way you can do well on let's see, step 2 or level 2. And my statement here is that your correlation between your level 1 score and your level 2 score they're highly correlated. So what does that mean? It means if you scored a 700 on step 1, the chance that you score at least a 700 on step 2 is pretty good. It's like, I think it's somewhere around 60 to 70%. So you got a 60 to 70% chance of scoring that well on level 2. If this was your level 1, this is your level 2. So what does that mean if you made a 400? Well, pretty much the same applies. You have a 60 to 70% chance to make a 400 again. So what if you made a 400 and you said, well, I really would like to make this? Doesn't mean that you can't. It just means that you have to work harder. So you're going to have to work harder than this guy. So this guy's going to say he did X, Y, and Z, and he's going to say he made a 750. So his score went up by doing X, Y, Z. And you're going to think, well, heck, I did X, Y, Z to the 17th power. So basically you did it 17 times, and I still only made a 673, or whatever. With that being said, it just goes to show you that what I'm trying to get at here is, there's a time factor, and maybe the time that they put in for step 1 is just starting to compound. So what I'm saying is just it's not impossible. Don't count yourself out. But once again, you do need to realize that if you did do not quite as well on level 1 and you would like to do better on level 2, it's going to require a little more work than maybe your counterpart who did better on level 1 already. They're not going to have to work quite as hard to just do equally as well. So I think y'all understand that, and that makes sense. And I believe it's not anything that's just out of this world. So from there, I remember I mentioned this the other day that the COMLEX is not the USMLE, and the USMLE is not the COMLEX, and you probably should just think of them as two separate tests, and 100% stand by that fact. And here's kind of my thoughts on it. The COMLEX equals the USMLE plus the OMT and OPP. While it might seem true, it's not, and that's a pretty big one. A lot of people try to basically say that, I can study for this one, and I can study this, and I can study the two separately, and then I can just go take the USMLE. That's kind of where I feel like at least when I was a student and a student, which is about 3 years ago now, and a good bit's changed in 3 years. This is where I feel like the biggest fallacy was made. We would have folks that would make 600 to 650, and which is fairly well. That's usually greater than one standard deviation above the mean. So somewhere around the 85th to the 90th percentile, if you're looking at percentiles, on the COMLEX, and then they would take the USMLE just based off that, and then they go take the USMLE and they would pass. But usually they would make below national average or right at national average. And this is kind of where you see some of those studies that have popped up that the USMLE is harder to pass, or the DO students that take the USMLE don't do as well. And you're kind of wondering why. And I think this is the reason why they basically over-assumed. And the way to just kind of avoid that is just like I said earlier, study for the two separately. So a good COMLEX score does not equal a good USMLE score. And that's kind of what I've been saying. A good USMLE score can equal a good COMLEX score, plus or minus. I've heard of people that did better percentile-wise on the USMLE over the COMLEX, but that's actually fairly rare. The OMT part is what will get you. If you are the person that says, I'm not going to study for the OMT part, number one, I would strongly suggest against it, and I would actually say that that's a very, for lack of a better word, idiotic move. The OMT part can be virtually free questions if you know some of the viscerosomatic stuff. The OMT part is getting significantly harder, but you can't count yourself out there. You need to basically just go learn it cold, and knock OMT out of the park, because it's sometimes it's anywhere from 20 to 25% of your test. And with that being said, if it's that high, of a yield, it's very easy to see how you could make say you made a 240 on the USMLE, and then you swing around and you make a 500 on the COMLEX. This is above national average. This is right at national average. And it's like, wow, well, you just gave away 20% of your exam. You just basically told them, here, I don't want it. And that's, not the smartest test taking move. And this is kind of course, about test taking moves and stuff like that. So once again, this can happen because this is just the way the exams are prepared for. If you prepare for the USMLE, it's usually a little bit easier to just kind of go ahead and co-prepare for the COMLEX, as opposed to if you prepare for the COMLEX to co-prepare for the USMLE. And like that said, it's kind of last statement down here. You can prep for the USMLE and cram for the COMLEX, but it's a little difficult to do it in reverse. And the reason I say that is just kind of how you approach questions. If you take all the USMLE practice tests and you prepare for that like you're going to take it, and then let's say you take your USMLE about a month before you take your COMLEX, and during this 1 month time, you just prep for the COMLEX. Basically, you do OMT, and then you practice COMBANK, COMQUEST questions. This is a doable move. Doing the reverse of that is a little harder. Taking the COMLEX first, and then using that extra month to prep for the USMLE, for whatever reason, seems to be a little more difficult. And then once again, we're all of us sitting in this classroom are DOs. So this is the must. This is the one you have to pass. And if you don't pass it, then you don't get to graduate. So this one's kind of extra, and we all know it's kind of extra. Even subconsciously, we know it's extra. So if you take this one first, and you felt like you did well, what if you take it and you get your score back? You made a 700. You're like, oh man, I did really well. And then so your desire to study for this one's going to decrease. So anyway, just all that being said, just kind of taking into mind some of the common stuff that we'll mess up on as humans and those type of things, and always prepare for OMT. Don't miss those questions. So about the exam, I'm a big proponent of basically getting to know your opponent, and that basically means you go look at the blueprint. And I know I talked about the blueprint the other day for the COMAT exams. And remember that 10% thing that I told you about, just going to look at it, gives you about 10% on the exam. Does it really? Probably not. But if you study it and, actually focus on where to focus your learning, I really do feel like it helps. And I definitely used it, and I do feel like it helps. And you kind of look at the blueprint here, basically you go over here and you find the ones with the highest percentages. And you make sure you know these on test day, especially if you've kind of fallen behind or something's happened. This being the biggest one, basically this cognitive behavioral. I always feel like this was like neuro, psych, and then like drugs of abuse, and then OMT type stuff. And I think this is where a lot of like your OMT visceral somatic stuff comes in. And that is a very big portion of. I know at least for level 1, I know it was a lot. For level 2, I felt like it was a good bit as well. Level 3, I felt like it was intertwined into a lot of the questions, but not exactly the same. And then once again, here's the biggest thing to me for level 2. When you look at, basically, your level 1, 80% of the exam is understanding the scientific disease and mechanism. And, everybody knows that, what is the mechanism of action, those type of things, all those questions that you got asked. For level 2, it's history and physical. And if you know the presentation of illness for step 2, what, a patient with Cushing's disease looks like, what a patient with an abdominal aortic aneurysm looks like, what a patient with, pancreatitis looks like, you can really do well in this exam just based off that alone. Because every line consists of, a patient's age, a patient's usually a gender, so they're male or female. Usually you get an age, and then usually you get some form of chief complaint. And in that chief complaint, they usually hit at stuff that really kind of point here. And if you can basically take a good history and physical, which is what, most of the time as third-year students, we try to push y'all to do, take really long, thorough history and physicals. This is supposed to help with that. And if you can do that, then you can do well in this exam. So where to find these blueprints? Here's just some of the links. You can kind of go there as your own leisure. Just take a look at them. Those are going to kind of be the full links. Remember, you can always kind of link. The COMLEX has like a link in. You have the dimensions, and then you can link into each dimension to see, what exactly each is in each group, which I encourage you to do, and just at least be familiar with it. So about the exam, everybody that sits for the exam has the ability to make a 999. And this is the COMLEX again. So basically every test question is scored. They know who what percent of the people get this question right. So let's say you have question X or question N. You take it, and the Comlex folks know that at the little testing center that 63% of the people get this question right. And then you do that for every single question 400 times, and some of them are going to vary, 20%, 90%. Maybe they might have some questions that are only like 7% or 3%. Are very very hard, and they know what percent of people get every one of them right, and they give each one of them kind of a number. Maybe this one you get 10 points. For this one you get 3 points. For this one you get, I don't know, 1 point, something like that. All that adds up to give you your total score. And with that being said, since they know all of this, everybody that sits for the exam already, you have the ability to make a 999. So you're not limited by who took the exam on what day, or I took the exam with a bunch of smart folks, so I can't do as well, or those type of things. Anyway, everybody has the ability to make a 999. But also, on the flip side of that, everybody has the ability to fail. So if for whatever reason students decided to anarchy and not ever study, and all go show up and take the Comlex, every one of them could fail the exam. So everybody in the nation could fail the exam. Now that would mess up the numbers, and I'm sure the next year the exam would be significantly easier. But anyway, with that being said, you all have the ability to fail. You all have the ability to make a 999, and a 999 is the max score. And remember, it's just based off that, and there are pilot exams. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. So Comlex Level 2, how it's scored. This is just some info that I kind of figured out and learned along the way, and we'll kind of talk about each number. But remember, passing is 400. Most people know that. Most people don't know this. The max score is a 999. I don't know. There might be special scenarios where it's greater than 1,000. I've heard random rumors of people making over 1,000. I don't know. But from everything I looked and studied and tried to find on websites and stuff like that, 999 was the max score. The mean's a 540. Standard deviation's about 100. Sometimes it's like 80 to 100. They'll put that on their little thing. And the standard error of measurement is 30 to 40, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more as well. So for the USMLE Step 2, this is just kind of the numbers on it. Remember, the passing score is a 209. Once again, max score is 300. Most people don't know that. Most people do know this. The mean is, 238. Remember, this is whenever I took the exam. So this information is a little old. It's possibly 3 years old. This information is correct. I'll look this back up. So I know that for the Comlex Level 2, this was, at least as of last year, this was still correct. For the USMLE, I know the one that changes a lot on the USMLE is this one. So these could be different, which remember for the Comlex was 80 to 100, 19. Could be anywhere from like 17 to 21. I know for I think the USMLE Step 1, when I took it, it was like a 22. The mean score is a 238, and standard error measure is 6. So once again, we'll talk about that a little bit different. The one thing you'll notice real quick that I'll make a comment to is that the mean. You remember the mean for level 1 was a 500. The mean here is a 540, so the score has gone up. Same goes for here. I think the mean was like a 221 or something like that, or 222 when I took it for Step 1. And then now it's a 238, so it's going up a little bit there. So what does each one of these things mean? Everybody knows that passing means passing, the max score is the max score, and the mean score is the average, and you all kind of understand there. Standard deviation, remember, this is kind of what we use to get our percentiles. One standard deviation of the mean encompasses 68.2% of the scores. And we'll kind of talk about that right here. This is 68. This is one standard deviation right here, from here to here. So one standard deviation. And within this is that 62.8% of the scores. So, those type of things. 2 standard deviations is out to here, and then, 3 is out to here. And within the 3 is the 99.9% of all scores is within the 3. And when, within the 4 is 95%. Oh, and it looks like it was 99.7% of all scores are within 3 standard deviation. 95. That all makes sense just looking at that chart. So, and that's what each standard deviation means. So one standard deviation above or one standard deviation below. And we'll talk about each one of those scores. So basically, if you score one standard deviation above the mean, you make it in the 84th percentile. So looking at that right here, that would be right here, and that's the 84th percentile. Would be that right there. So this one right here would be the 84th percentile. That means you did better than 84% of students or other test takers. If you do one standard deviation below the mean, you made in the 16th percentile. That means that you only did better than 16% of students or people that took the exam. Same goes for 2 standard deviations and 97.7, and then 2 standard deviations below is only 2.3, and you didn't pass. And then 3 standard deviations in 99.9 percentile. And that's just based off of the fact that there's a percentage down here. So I know it only encompasses 99.7%, but you can make it the 99 percentile. So how's the exam scored? The standard error measure, the thing I wanted to kind of talk about. So, give you the standard error measurement score, and let's say for whatever reason it's 25. And let's say you made a 500. So that means kind of it's a plus or minus 25. So if you took 25 points away, it'd be a 475. You added 25 points to it, it'd be a 525. And basically, program directors are supposed to look at the score and say anyone that fell within this range, their score should be considered equal, and you shouldn't select that resident or that student based off their score if they kind of overlapped. So basically, here's our student A and student B. Student A made a 500, student B made a 480. Standard error measure was 25, so they did have overlapping scores. So these two students should be considered equal whenever you're kind of considering them for a spot. That's what the standard error measure means here. That's just something to think about. You got your buddy that beat you by 2 points. That's not a big deal. Y'all really made the same thing. You really shouldn't worry about it. Somebody that made a 500 and then somebody that made a 600. There's a difference there, and that is actually it's there versus if you made a 505 versus a 515. That's not much of a difference. Those are probably pretty much the same score. You could all take the test again 2 days later, and your score might go up and his score might go down, and those type things. So, and that's just what that is. So, with all that, what does it mean whenever you're pertaining to COMLEX Level 2 and all that kind of stuff? And here's a picture I just kind of made a few years ago, but all this stuff still stays the same. So, and this is the numbers. So, once again, this is like the 84th percentile. And let's say you told yourself you wanted to make, in the 97th. This is the 97th percentile. You want to make it in the 97th percentile. Then you knew you needed to make a 240 or a 276. I mean, a 740 or 276. And all the reason I give you this here is just so you have the raw numbers, what each number looks like, so you kind of have a goal. Because remember, we want to write a goal down, we want to write a number down. And the other thing, since the mean has increased, let's say for level 1 you made a 450, and you want to do radiology, and you know that you need to really, really, really do well, kind of somewhere in here for level 2. So the thing that you know now is that this is the number that you need to shoot for, and that also that the mean has gone up a little bit. So just studying to what you thought would get you to the average of 500 actually won't get you quite to average. So if you made a 500, you'd score actually somewhere over here. And that's just, if you want to beat the mean, you need to know that your score needs to go up a little bit. Everybody's score on average does go up a little bit, but how much it goes up is going to kind of hopefully be dependent off, how much effort you put into it, and studying and those type of things. So, but anyway, here's the numbers, if you needed to know that. And so about 1.6, 1.7, standard deviations below the mean is kind of the failing mark. This is 1 standard deviation below the mean. So you can make 1 standard deviation below the mean and still pass. But hopefully we're not shooting for there. Hopefully we're all kind of shooting for this range. That's kind of where we have this class. So anyway, going from there. Like I said, one thing you'll notice that, the kind of scores changed and that you need to do a little bit better for step 2 versus step 1 if you're trying to, make your score more competitive or something like that. But talked about that. So why do we need to know how it scored and all that kind of stuff? The main thing is just for graduating. We all want to graduate. We all want to move on and be done with these tests. So just graduate. So you got to graduate, so you got to pass the COMLEX. Number 2 is residency programs. Remember, as we kind of changed from the the AOA to the ACGME side. Remember, the AOA is pretty big on audition rotations, so they want to see your face, get to know you, those type of things. The ACGME, not as big on audition rotations. They look a little bit more at just kind of what your dean's letter says, what your application looks like, and some of the scores and stuff like that. So getting into the residency program you want is also good to have your test scores back. Some of this even applies for audition rotations. So some auditions will say that you can't audition at their residency program if you don't have over 500 on COMLEX Level 1 or COMLEX Level 2. So that's one thing that can kind of play into, and that's that right there. So this is kind of why we need to know what we need to do, how we need to get there, and those type of things. Going on from there, we're going to start kind of talking about learning, how we learn, just the way to retain info, what to do, what not to do, how to decrease forgetting, the best way to learn for board exams, and cramming. We'll actually talk a little bit about cramming. I'm actually a fan of cramming, and why. So, for learning, remember you have an outside process. It's it's outside stimulus process. So, my words coming through the computer in front of you is being processed. You're going to deem it if it's important or not important. It's going to move from short-term memory. From short-term memory, it's going to kind of go from there into your long-term memory. And then what moves into your long-term memory is what, is kind of the kicker there. So everything moves into short-term memory, but not everything moves into long-term memory. We all know that. So short-term memory has limits. They have that thing that's it's like 3 to 5 plus or minus 2, or 3 to 7 plus or minus 2. It's like the number of items that you can remember in short-term memory. And it has something to do with like phone numbers. It's like why we struggle to remember a full phone number every single time. It's because it's like just right at the brink of too many digits. That's when we kind of break it up in blocks or chunk it, and remembering chunks makes it easier. So you have your phone number, which is 7 digits, and we divide it into 2 blocks. So then it makes it 2 chunks of information, 1, 2, as opposed to 7 chunks of information, and it's easier to remember the 2 as opposed to the 7. But the kicker here that I wanted to try to basically hit at is long-term memory has no limits, meaning that if we had time and we had the ability, we could truly learn anything we wanted to and remember it. The big thing is here is time, and there's only a finite amount of time as we prepare for the exams. So because we only have a finite amount of time, we can't really convert everything to long-term memory. But long-term memory is the key here. So you got to be able to remember it and retrieve it, and we can't just have it floating around in short-term. So declarative memory is the memory of facts and experiences, and this is the kind of the bulk of what we will be focusing on, or whenever you study. Usually it's a form of declarative memory that you're learning. And if you want to look up all the stuff on declarative memory and stuff like that, you can. So our jobs are going to be to basically convert short-term memory into long-term memory, which is all going to be a form of declarative memory. And how do we want to do that? This is called the learning pyramid. And if any of you get to know me, I always say I can't spell very well when I'm up here writing. Half of it's because I get nervous. The other half is because I really can't spell very well. There's learning. Anyway, this is the learning pyramid. You can look this up. You can type in the learning pyramid and you'll find it on the Google and all that kind of fun stuff. So basically, what is this? This is the retention. This is a 30-day retention. It's a 30-day or it's a 3-day. I forget which one it is, but basically it's pretty much the same for 3 versus 30 days. And these are percents. So this is the percent that you retain after listening to this lecture at, we'll say, 30 days. So you will remember that you listened to this lecture, but you won't remember much else at 30 days. So at 30 days, you'll remember that you listened. Maybe you'll remember the 1 or 2 things that I'd like you to remember, which is set a goal and that there's no secret ingredient. I can't spell it again. Secret. There's not one. And that it's just a lot of effort. So just put in your effort. So goal and effort. That's basically the 2 things that hopefully you'll remember for this. And that, this is, and basically that memory retention. So this is the memory retention at 30 days or 3 days. The percentage of listening to this lecture. This is it for reading, and this is why I say I don't like to read as much, because I feel like reading is low yield. It's based off this. You have to read. You absolutely have to read. You can't say, oh, well, because memory is low yield, I'm never going to do it. That is, you can't take that approach either. You must read. You must read constantly, but you need to basically do it more, to me, in the form of this type stuff, which we'll talk about a little bit. Audio-visual. So this is, to me, watching the YouTube video, and this is what I did for a lot. I watched a lot of videos. Listening to the lecture with pictures and listening like this. This is actually be an audio video lecture with pictures and me talking and drawing. Hopefully you're interacting a little bit. So hopefully just by, instead of listening to this lecture sitting in class, hopefully just by doing this, we've actually increased your retention by about 20%. So maybe we'll get a little bit more than goals and no secret ingredient. But then we kind of get into demonstration. To me, this is kind of where we start to increase our yield significantly. Remember, teaching, this is actually you giving the lecture. So these are the Mayo lectures that we give as residents, and the talks that you'll give as a student. A poorly prepared lecture is really more of a demonstration. So just remember that. Not every lecture is actually teaching others. So You can have a poorly prepared lecture that's more like a demonstration. You don't actually know the info as well, but at least you're doing a little better than you're doing better than just reading it or just listening to it. But you're not doing quite as well as teaching others. Practice. This is using the info every day. This is taking care of patients, and to me, this is questions. So this is where our questions come in. But remember, you have to have a background of this. There has to be enough of this to contribute to this. But this is, to me, it's practiced retrieval, and we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit too. And then group discussions, talking about it with your friends. Our Facebook group is hopefully going to kind of serve this purpose. So anyway, we're trying to hit as many of these as we can. I'm doing a lot of the teaching, and as I told the students from last year, the person that got the most out of last year's board review course was me. I actually got the most out of it, and I kind of feel bad because I learned more than they did, but that's just kind of part of it because I'm doing all the teaching, which once again the memory retention on that is a little higher than them maybe even demonstrating it or the audio visual or just listening to it. So going on from there, once again, these are rehearsal techniques or what I call passive learning, and these are more of your active learning techniques. So kind of look at that again. Active learning techniques are your demonstrations, your discussions, practicing it, teaching others, and this is kind of where we want to focus is through active learning. And rehearsal or passive learning is your lecture, your audio visual, and it's just kind of listening. Remember, this is much easier than this, so we'll usually choose to do this if we don't actually make ourselves choose this one. So remember, make yourself choose active. So once again, it's kind of back to it. 98% of the lecture is forgotten within about 30 days. Reading alone, you only retain about 10% in 3 days. So that's what this is, 3 days. So this is a 3-day chart. So, and if you read plus take notes, it increases it to 20. So that's good. Gain a little bit out of taking notes. Reading and associating with pictures or videos. So that means like you read your Mayo and then you watched a video on restrictive cardiomyopathy and your pericarditis and your amyloid that causes your those other restrictive type stuff. Then your ability to retain that information is going to be a little better. So you're going to get up to 30% besides just reading alone, which is going to be 10% in 3 days. And then your verbal retention of a story is about 10% at 3 days, but if you add a picture, it jumps up to 65 because we're picture-based beings, which is something that's kind of good to know. And that's why I try to focus my stuff on, at least when I'm learning, when I'm trying to learn something new. Picture-based diagrams, drawing, that's all those little pictures I draw that y'all see on those little study guides. Some of that's just so I can kind of help myself remember it. Kind of looking at that pyramid, we learned that the active process is the best way to do it. And, rehearsal techniques are kind of active forms of learning. So when we are, not rehearsal techniques are not active forms of learning. But we're going to talk about each form of learning and kind of the differences between the two. So rehearsal techniques, one of the lectures I listened to and one of the studies I used to kind of help prepare this referred to rehearsal techniques as kind of the illusion of competence. So to me, the best example of this is a mnemonic. I'm not a mnemonic fan, and you'll hear me say that. And there are residents that are mnemonic fans, and some of them have absolutely crushed, all the complexes and USMLEs and those type of things. But to me, a mnemonic is a perfect example of an illusion of competence. I can remember, whether it's the SLE mnemonic, dopamine rash, or the doctors, I don't know many mnemonics, as you can kind of see, but you can memorize a mnemonic and you can sound smart and feel like you know the information, so you feel like you know SLE frontwards, backwards, and sideways because the mnemonic I remember for SLE or lupus is the dopamine rash. So the dopamine rash, so then that makes you feel like you know lupus, and then you get the lupus question and you miss it. And you miss it over and over and over, and you keep going back to this mnemonic that you learned, and you keep relearning this mnemonic. But remember, basically all you've done is memorize a mnemonic. You haven't learned how to apply the information. So you have an illusion of competence. You've tricked yourself into thinking that you know it, but you really don't know it. And that's the key. So it's not the ability just to be able to recite the info out loud. You have to be able to apply it. And that is where I feel like kind of these rehearsal techniques fail you. So you fail to apply with these. Flashcards are another one. I like flashcards. I review them. I look at them, especially the apps that are on my phone, because they're easy to do. The only thing is, once you've gone through a flashcard deck a couple of times, you start memorizing the answers, which this is another reason I don't like to rework questions, and it's because you memorize answers. But we'll talk about reworking questions in a little bit. But anyway, that's kind of what you did there. And once you start memorizing answers, it's not good for you. highlighting, it's kind of just rereading. Underlining is rereading. Outlining is just rereading. And then, memorizing to recognize and memorizing to reproduce. To me, this is kind of what flashcards do and what reworking questions does. You just kind of memorize to recognize, you memorize to reproduce. To me, this is a lot of early med school, year 1, year 2. I did a lot of this, and undergrad I did a lot of this. But for our board exams, we can't learn that way. So, and this is on rehearsal techniques. This is definitely what I did for the first 2 years of med school. And basically, why you do it is because we're under a constant time constraint. So it results in constant cramming. It works pretty good for classroom exams, and that's why all of us are here and we kind of moved on. It's because most of the time our subjects were over a single topic, and we had a couple days to kind of cram for it. So we crammed for it, and then we went in there and we regurgitated all the information, and then we basically had about a day to veg out, and we slept and we did whatever we do after exams, and then we basically started cramming for the next exam. So the rehearsal techniques, they work because basically you don't have enough time. But for a board exam, it doesn't work. So we have to learn how to learn differently. And going from there, why these rehearsal techniques work and what you're doing is you're practicing what we call a heuristic or a problem-solving approach. We all have them. We all use them. And they are good in certain scenarios, but sometimes they're not. And for board exams, they can kind of bite you in the rear. So the problem is there's too much stuff and there's just not enough time. And because of these two things, especially for the first 2 years of med school, we do a lot of cramming. And one of the ways we do a lot of cramming is through these two heuristics, the availability heuristic and the representativeness heuristic. So the availability heuristic is basically that the first thing that comes to mind is giving the most credibility. And because that's giving the most credibility, you're likely to select that answer. So the first thing that comes to mind, that's the answer that you pick. And we do that very commonly. You're reading an answer, A looks good, you think you kind of remember A, you pick A, and in med school, for the first couple of years, you get that question right. So why do you get that question right? It's because for the last 1 to 2 weeks, you've only been studying gross anatomy. And because you've only been studying gross anatomy, the first thing that comes to mind is likely gross anatomy. You're not likely to remember your med phys question that they asked you, 2 weeks ago, whenever you've been studying for, gross anatomy for the last week. You're not likely to remember the biochem equation whenever you read that question. So the first thing that comes to mind is giving the most credibility because that's the thing you've been looking at most frequently. So that's good. And you actually get that question right. So this works. The way med schools are trying to get away from keeping this from working are they're chunking exams. So you're taking less exams and you're taking like your gross anatomy, your med phys, and your biochem exam all at the same time. And that's one way they're trying to basically make availability not work. And the reason they're trying to do this is because they understand this need to be a long-term memory. Representativeness is basically that two things with similar features are basically deemed exactly the same. And this heuristic works really well for the fact that when we're studying for exams and we're only studying gross anatomy, you only have to basically be able to tell the one thing that makes A versus B different. So if you know that one thing that makes A versus B different, you can get this question right, and that's using kind of representativeness. If you don't know that one thing, you're going to miss it. But if you know that one thing, then you get this question right. But then on a board exam, what if you have A, B, C, and D, and what if A and B both have that one thing, and C and D might not? So you're able to eliminate those two, but then you can't get it between these two. And this is I always commonly hear students say, I'm able to get it down between two, but then I always pick the wrong one. I feel like that's kind of using the representativeness heuristic there. So, like I said, the availability is what you just studied, and that's what you're likely to remember, and that's likely to be the correct answer. And since it's your tests are over kind of a finite set of information, only gross anatomy, most of the time, remember they're trying to chunk these exams to make it a little more difficult. Then that's all you have to know, and you just have to know that one relevant detail between the two to kind of discriminate answer towards A versus answer towards B. So that's kind of how these two help us in med school. So why cramming worked in med school, but it doesn't work for boards, has to do with these retrieval and rehearsal techniques that we become very, very good at. And when we become very good at these retrieval and rehearsal techniques, we can do well on our med school exams without having to lose a lot of time studying. So, learning how to do this is, it works very, very well, especially those first 2 years, because it's kind of a constant cram. But when we get to our board exam, it just doesn't quite work the same. And they actually looked at it. So this is a study. They looked at students and they looked at cramming, and they basically, because you hear all your professors say, I know I heard all mine say in medical school, if you're still cramming now, you're not gonna It's not going to work. You're not going to do bad. You're going to do bad on the test. There's no way. And I remember thinking, if I could get an extra hour in, I could possibly increase my score from like a 75 to an 85 just with an hour of looking at the material. And that's based off this. And the results they found, that they indicated that the students who crammed normally did better on tests. So they took groups of students that normally crammed versus groups of students that normally didn't cram, and they looked at their test scores. And the ones that crammed usually did a little bit better, with a significant reduction in time, when given a finite amount of time to learn a material. So what they did was they had group one. So they had group one and they had group two. Group one was a bunch of crammers, and group two were a bunch of non-crammers. And they basically said, okay, here's this new material. So this is the new material, and you both have to learn it, and you have to learn it within X amount of time. And then they were going to test them on it. And the group that crammed regularly was good at reproducing the information based off cramming. This group wasn't so good. So basically, this is why med school can select out crammers, which is not necessarily good, but it can. And going from there, this is kind of what that study showed. This is basically a little chart that I made, and there's other info to back this up. I couldn't find all the exact studies on it, but basically, the month before the exam when you're studying, your ability to remember that stuff on test day is not very good. But a couple hours before the exam, your ability to remember that stuff for test day, it goes up significantly. And this is basically why cramming works in med school again. So, but for board exam it won't work, but for the one single subject exam that you're going to take, it has a good chance of working. So remember your active learning techniques that we kind of talked about earlier. These are what we want to try to focus on. These are going to be kind of what the guy called it in that lecture that he gave, and that study that I looked at was the self-regulation kind of technique. It basically includes like selection, organization, association, and then the big ones are this spaced learning, this interleaved learning, and the testing effect. One of the reasons I like practice tests is just taking a lot of practice tests improves, or taking a lot of tests improves our ability to take tests. So we kind of get better at tests over time just because we're taking more tests. Interleaved learning means that, interleaved learning is basically just that you looked at it, at point 1 on the graph, and then later on you looked at it again. So there's basically some time in between here where you didn't look at it, but you looked at it in between, and that's the same thing kind of with spaced. So it's just that you are covering the same material multiple times in multiple different facets, and the thing is that you're not covering it here through flashcards. So you're not doing it that way. You're doing it either through, basically practice retrieval techniques, which are like questions, or just, with a blank sheet of paper and saying, what do you know about Cushing's? And then writing everything down you know about Cushing's, and then 1 month later, pulling out a blank sheet of paper again and go, what do you know about Cushing's? And writing everything down again. And here's one of those little studies I found kind of on this, which basically had groups that were kind of selected out, and they had a group that just studied the material 3 times, so they were given a chunk of info. So they were given I think it was something to read. So a couple pages to read, maybe it was 10 pages to read. So they were given information to read, and they had 4 study sessions where they just read the material. So they sat down 4 times and just read it. They had another group that read it 3 times, and then one time they kind of talked about it. So one time they talked about it, practiced remembering what they had read. And one group that read it 1 time, and then they spent 3 times basically trying to remember what they read. So read it once, tried to remember what they read 3 times, read it 3 times, practiced remembering it once, and then just read it all 4 times. So spent 4 times remembering it. Then they asked them, what % of the information do you think that you will retain? So they said, how well do you think you'll do on the exam? And this is this column over here. These folks thought that they would get somewhere around, 48% of the questions right. And then read it once, practiced remembering it 3 times, basically thought that they would only get about 40% of the information right. So that being said, the people that just read it the most thought they learned the most, but then they actually tested them and they didn't. The people that practiced the retrieval got about 60% of the questions right. The people that just read it 3 times got about 40% of the questions right. So what's that to say? The people that practiced retrieval did better even though they felt like they were going to do worse. So they thought they weren't going to do better, but they did better. And that's also kind of echoed in this study. They took basically another group of folks and they studied it one time, and then a little bit later they said, "Hey, what do you remember about it?" And I think they waited a month or so. I don't remember in the exact study, but so they gave them information to study. So here's the information. I want you to learn that. And then they gave them 1 month time, and then they tested them on it. So, and this the study that just studied it, and they didn't try to remember it ever again. They got about 15% of the questions right. That makes sense. It's kind of what we talked about earlier. Then they had another group that they studied it one time, and then they basically said a couple weeks later, they said, "All right, let's try to remember everything that we studied that 1 month ago." But they didn't get to actually go look at the information. They just tried to remember what they studied. Well, it jumped up to about 35%. So you had a basically 100% increase just by trying to remember it one time. And then they had a group that they tried to remember it multiple times over the practice period. And basically it resulted in them remembering about 80% of what they studied. So basically practice retrieval. So this is one reason I like practice tests. And getting into this, it doesn't have to necessarily be practice tests, because practice tests cost money, and that stuff's expensive. So it can be through, your question banks. It can also be through, something I mentioned earlier, let's say Cushing's. You write down Cushing's at the top of your piece of paper, and you write everything that you know about Cushing's. And then after you do that, you go study Cushing's, and you go read about Cushing's in your book. So you read about Cushing's, how to diagnose it, how to treat it, all the nuances of the physical exam, all the nuances of the history and physical, and then you have that sheet of paper, and you've learned it, and you've kind of made your notes there. And then about a couple weeks later to a month later, you get a piece of paper again, and you write down Cushing's at the top of a piece of paper, and you try to write down all this stuff. And then you just kind of keep doing that, spaced over time, keep trying to remember everything you wrote. And then you just do that for everything. You do that for every disease state, you do that for every, all your major stuff. And then, this is kind of practice retrieval. And this would serve the exact same purposes of practice exam. I like practice exams for other reasons, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, what we gather from all this is that practice retrieval is the best way to do it. And that makes good sense. So also kind of on this learning stuff, what not to do when you're trying to study. Some of the big stuff is just attempting to multitask. Multitasking is just, we can't do it. Our brains physically can't do it. They've got multiple studies out there. Just type in brain's ability to multitask. We're not good at it. We segregate. So we have two things that we're doing. We have thing A and thing B. What we do is we focus on thing A for 10 minutes, and then we swap over and we focus on thing B for 2 minutes, and then vice versa. The thing is, let's say thing A is something that's not studying, and thing B is something that's studying. I guarantee you, at the end of the hour, you'll have done A a lot more than you'll have done B. So, and remember, the goal is to do B. So you want to study. Anyway, we just can't multitask. So try not to do it. Listening to music with words, watching TV, kind of just goes into that multitasking thing. White noise. I can't spell it. White noise. Supposedly not so bad. Classical stuff, supposedly not so bad. I've heard, languages you can't understand are supposedly not so bad for the music thing if you have to have something in the background. Studying for hours and hours and hours on end without a break, usually not the best idea. Usually it's just because we start getting tired. And when we start getting tired, we just don't want to keep studying. So our desire to try to learn what we are doing significantly decreases. And then sacrificing sleep and physical activity to study. One thing I looked at, 4 hours was kind of the thing. If you don't get 4 hours of sleep after a big study session, at least minimum of 4 hours, you won't retain any of the information that you had over time. The big thing here is you have to be able to at least cover the information. At least that's always my thought. So for for medical school, I crammed a lot, and one reason I crammed a lot was I sacrificed a lot of sleep just so I could cover the material, and then I would go to bed after the exam. So physical activity is a big one. Staying physically active, doing a little bit every day. It doesn't mean you have to go crush physical activity, but the thing is, being physically active does make you smarter. One of the little things I like to tell everybody is they did a study with like a geriatric population. I think it was 65 plus or 75 plus, something like that. And all they did was basically make them work out, and then they took IQ tests. So they took an IQ test at the beginning, and then they took an IQ test at the end, and the only thing they did in between was make them work out, and their IQs all went up just by working out. I think that's absolutely phenomenal. So by working out, you get smarter. So go work out. So now we're going to kind of talk about questions. The questions that you're most likely to see, kind of how many questions you should work, where you should direct your kind of focus when you are working questions, kind of this time spent, approach style, at least the approach that I used, and how to discern good from bad questions. This we'll talk a little bit about, but not a whole lot. So questions, anyway, know exactly what percent of COMLEX or USMLE would just be basically questions that you remember directly from memory. Anyway, with that being said, it's really, really low. It's only about 30% of the exam. So you'll fail the exam if you're basing everything off of your ability to just remember. And then remember, this is kind of why I say, again, it's that applied knowledge. So you got to know it. So, but if you don't know it, you can't apply it. So you have to know it to be able to apply it, but you have to be able to apply it to get the questions right. So and you have to, once again, apply it to the new situation. So you can't just memorize. Just memorizing won't cut it. You have to be able to apply it. And it's kind of that. So here's the bulk of the questions you'll get asked for step 2. It will make up, it's anywhere from 70 to 80% of your exam. This is how the STEM will read, and this is what it'll say. What is the most likely diagnosis? What is the best initial diagnostic test or step? What is the most accurate diagnostic test? What is the best initial therapy or treatment? What physical exam finding is most likely to be associated with the patient above? And then what is the next best step in management? This is super big on step 3. But for step 2, it's pretty big as well. And remember, the next step in management can be a test or a treatment. And then for the COMLEX, it uses the word appropriate a lot as opposed to likely or initial. So don't let the wording there throw you off. Those mean the same thing. But these are the questions you're going to be asked. So what did I do with this information? Since I knew these were the questions that I was going to be asked, and this is published information. Everyone can find this anywhere. Not anywhere, but you look in the right spots. You can find this, and what I did was I basically had all my diseases, since I'm using Cushing's a lot. So you have your Cushing's that you're going to use, and basically, what is the most likely diagnosis? What do I need for Cushing's to be the most likely diagnosis? And I looked up all that info and wrote it down. And then what is the best initial diagnostic test for Cushing's? And then what is the most accurate diagnostic test? And what is the best initial therapy or treatment? And then the next step in management. So I learned all that I tried to learn all that for a lot of your major diseases. And then knowing that, I just kind of went from there and was able to try to apply that to questions. The thing that you'll know about here, like the most accurate diagnostic test, usually this is like a biopsy. It's a biopsy or something like that. Getting tissue, cultures, those type things. So you remember, initial is usually something that's cheaper. So there's kind of ways to kind of boil these things down. If they say initial, we want to do something that might be a little cheaper. If they say most accurate, you might want to do something that's a little more invasive. Those type of things. So what question banks should I use and how should I work questions? We talked a little bit about this in class, but I liked UWorld the best. And then for the COMLEX, I would like COMBank the best. If I had to tell you one way to do it, even if you were going to, let's say you're just going to take the COMLEX, you're not going to take the USMLE. Once again, I told you I would get the UWorld early on. And I would start working UWorld early, and then, a month or so before the exam, I'd get COMBank. And then I'd try to basically get through that bank as well. So this would give us all of UWorld and all of COMBank. If I had to say, I was just going to prepare for the COMLEX. And I wanted to do it in a mildly reasonable manner without buying, 5 question banks. Excuse me. But anyway, that's kind of the approach that I would say go at if, that's something that you can do. If it's not something you can do, or you want to go prepare for the USMLE, I'd buy UWorld and then I'd just try to get through UWorld as many times as I could. Some people like to get through, like I said, question banks multiple times. My thought on it is, you start running into rehearsal and retrieval and, those type things, more rehearsal type learning strategies when you start repeating questions. So this is kind of why I've always kind of tried to steer clear of working questions multiple times. But once again, it's about learning the information, and UWorld is very good for content coverage. So, you can cover UWorld twice and just basically look at it as like a review book that you're reading, as opposed to, necessarily working a question. Remember, we need to get good at answering questions, which can be done in multiple facets. But most of the time, the way you get good at answering questions is about just working questions, so you can kind of get used to the process once you've established the process and stuff like that. So there's a lot of other banks out there. There's COMBank, there's ComQuest, there's UWorld, there's Kaplan. There's USMLE RX, those type of things. So this is kind of some info that I ran across. No p-values on this, but once again, and this is not exact. So let's say this is your goal, and you want to give yourself a chance to meet this goal. My everything that I've looked at, read, studied, talked to folks about says that you need to work about 5,000 questions. So if this is your goal, you need to get to this many. And this is just to give you a chance. This does not mean that you will. I know folks that worked 8,000 questions and they made sub 500s. So, that's kind of part of it. It will happen sometime. But, if this is the goal, you got to try to do everything you can to get to that goal you've set. And, this kind of needs to be where you need to be aiming. So, this is usually about 2 question banks. So 5,000 questions is about 2 question banks. Say that your goal is the top 5%. Then you need to be aiming for about 10,000 questions. The way we kind of came up with this info is really a lot of student doctor work. So I went through Student Doctor Network, looked at a bunch of different stuff, who scored in the top 5% and what did they do. And then I talked to my friends that scored very well and what did they do. And looking at it, I also kind of weeded out the folks that on Student Doctor said they made a 280 on the USMLE, and what did they do? They read First Aid one time. So they read it one time and they swung around and made 280 because they're just that smart. That's what they always told me. They'd say, I'm just a genius. That person's not real. So what I did was I found the person that had a study method that gave them that. So the people I found were people that were like 15,000 questions and 12,000 questions and or 12,500 questions. They blew through every bank twice. Those type folks. And the number I kept running into to get to that 95th percentile was about the 10,000 questions. And the number I kept running into for about the 600 area was about the 5,000 question mark. CommBank also posted a study based off their question bank, which was this 2 to 4% improvement per 1,000 questions worked. So, you work 1,000 questions. Let's say you start your CommBank. Really, there's kind of a ramp up period. So, you have your 0% correct because you just started, and you have, 100% correct up here. And let's say, your first, I think it's about 300 to 500 questions, you kind of hit a plateau. So you've plateaued here. And let's say you've plateaued at 60% correct. From there on out, every 1,000 questions you work, your score will go up about 2 to 4%. So, let's say you work 1,000 questions and now you're at 64% correct. You work another 1,000 and you're at 68% correct. The thing about this is on the front end of your thousands, it's closer to the 4. On the back end of your thousands, it's closer to 2, which makes good sense. Let's say you're getting up into the 85+% correct mark. It's harder to make that go up as opposed to make a 70% go up to 74, as opposed to make 85 to go up to 89%. So you kind of get me there, and just that's kind of the in general. So what does this mean? How do you need to approach this? So let's say you start your questions, you realize that you're getting about 60% correct. You need to get, let's say you think you need to get about 80% correct to meet your goal. So you need to know about how many 1,000 questions you need to work to get to that. And that's just kind of a point you in the correct direction. So some other stuff, never work questions too quickly. My statement on this is it should take you about 8 to 10 minutes to work 10 questions. And if you do it much quicker than that, some of the stuff I've read says you'll miss about 10 to 15% of the questions that you knew. So questions you could have gotten right, you just miss. So, that's not a lot, but it kind of adds up over time. So you got 400 questions. You worked them all way too fast. That's a lot of 10%. So there was about 40 questions out there you just gave away. So you just handed the Comlex, the USMLE, the MBOME, you handed them 40 questions. Versus your buddy who worked it slower, he got those 40 questions right. And then the thing is, where you fall on the standard deviation curve can really affect your score. Let's say, what if you're out here? What if you're already greater than the first standard deviation and you blow 40 questions? So what if you only moved right here? You make you a 632 or something like that, which you did very well. But what if you gotten those 40 questions right? You might be somewhere in the 700s, just based off that 40 questions that you gave away. Down in the more meat of the curve, your score won't move as much, but 40 questions, when you get down kind of on the other end of it, could move you from failing to passing just by working questions too fast. I used to say never rework questions. There are scenarios where reworking questions is good, and it's kind of content coverage. Once again, situations where it's okay. If you feel like you're learning something, I say go for it, rework them. If you don't feel like you're learning something, I would not suggest reworking them. And it should roughly take you about 5 times as long to review questions as it does to work questions. So that means if you have 10 questions, it should take you about 10 minutes to work them and about 50 minutes to review them for a total of 60 minutes. This is in a perfect world. So in a perfect world, it should take you 60 minutes to get through 10 questions. Once again, it's not a perfect world, and we don't have enough time really to do this. So this is just if everything was perfect, and why should it take you so long? So you get to question number 1, you read it, you realize that you missed it or you got it right. You read through the explanation, you try to internalize the explanation there by jotting down a few notes. Then you go to your review book, like I said earlier, and you find that section and you write down some notes in the book. So now you write down notes in the book, and then you say, oh, well, I don't really completely understand it. So then you go to your content book, or your book with the most information, which let's say it's Harrison's, and you look it up in Harrison's, and then you read the section on Harrison's. So, and all that's going to take a lot more time, and that's why that it takes you about 5 times as long to review questions as it does to work through them. Going from there, just a quick blurb on kind of time doubling. And when you look at like undergrad and scores, and even the first couple of years of med school, this is kind of a good rule of thumb. It's basically if you made a C on a test and you want to make a B on the next test, you need to double your time. So let's say you spent 10 hours of studying to make a C and you want to make a B, that means you're going to need to be studying 20 hours. Let's say you made a B and you want to make an A, so now you got to study 40 hours. Now let's say you want to make 100 on the test, so now you need to study 80 hours. This can kind of be applied to the COMLEX for standard deviation moves. It's a much more rough than that. It doesn't quite pan out, but basically what I'm trying to say is, let's say you made a 500 and you studied 2,000 hours. That's a lot of hours. So now you want to make a 600. So you need to be prepared to study somewhere around 4,000 hours. And that's way off. There's no way. There's not 4,000 hours. So let's change that number. Let's say it was 200 hours to make a 500. You should be prepared to attempt to put in 400 hours to get to your 600. And what does that mean? It kind of goes back to the 5,000 question thing. You should be prepared to put this amount of time in. So you should plan for this amount of time. You should plan for the 5,000 questions. If you don't plan for that, then it might be hard. You might find yourself running out of time and start feeling overwhelmed. But since it's early, we're about a year out. Hopefully, all of us can plan for this amount of time. So this is kind of the approach that I use when you're getting kind of how to approach board style questions. And once again, this is the approach I use, but there isn't a ton of good info out there on how to approach questions. I would suggest look up everything you can on how to approach questions. Develop an approach for yourself. Develop an approach to how to review questions. And once you get your own approach, use your own approach. I have the approach that I use, and we'll kind of go through that. But once you get an approach, just use that same approach over and over and over. And hopefully you'll kind of develop your own thing and get better at it, and it'll help you get questions right. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about right now. This is kind of the resource that I used a lot on how to review material and kind of how to focus on like where I was missing questions when I started missing stuff. I still go to this website every now and then. It's a great website. I would suggest you go there and just kind of look through some of the info. But when you look at question style approaches, kind of the standard approach, which is just you read the question, you read the stem, then you look at the answers and you pick one. One other approach that I kind of came across was basically the standard approach plus covering the answers. So you read the stem, you covered up the answers, you thought what you started thinking what the answer you thought it was going to be, and then you made that selection in your mind. Since we've been saying it over and over, you think Cushing's is going to be the correct answer, so you're going to pick Cushing's if you see that answer down there, and then you're going to pull your hand away, you're going to look and see if Cushing's is there, and if it's there, you're going to pick it, you're going to move on. Another one's kind of the stem first approach. This kind of gets you, saves you a little time on like the pseudo cases where they kind of ask you just the last sentence is all you need to know to answer the question. Which of the following is the most common pneumonia? You don't really have to know the case presentation to know, what the most common pneumonia in the world is, or something like that. A 40-year-old, strep pneumo, those type of things. And then there's answer first approaches. This is the approach I used, and we'll kind of talk about why I used it. But going from there, the reason I stopped using this kind of answer covering approach, which is what a lot of people suggested and kind of where I headed first, was that I would read the question, cover up the answers. I would think that, I think X is going to be the answer, so I've decided that if X is present and the answer choice is below, I'm going to pick it. Well, then I would look at the answer choices below and X wouldn't be there. Well, then I get nervous, anxious. I would have to reread the question because I thought I missed something, and I ended up wasting a lot of time. So that's kind of why I stopped doing this one. because I ended up wasting time, and I felt like it ended up costing me more than actually helping me. Currently the approach that I use right now, and the approach that I'm about to talk about, I don't use it every single time, but I use it on all my hard questions, and I did use it every single time for a while. Now I kind of do more of a STEM first standard approach, kind of hybrid, along with some of this, especially if let's say I read the question and I'm just completely lost, then I always default back to this because I felt like it's a hard question. Now I'm just going to have to try to figure out the answer. So the approach that I used was basically I looked at the answer first. I looked at each answer, A, B, C, and D, and maybe even E. So you have A, B, C, D, E. And I basically looked at all the answers and I said, okay, what do I think the question is going to say based off these answers? So basically I'm making myself think. Let's say they have pancreatitis. Let's say they have abdominal aortic aneurysm. Let's say they have, ischemic bowel. Those type things is, answer choices. Appendicitis. And, I don't know, what's another one? Kidney stone. So let's say these are our answer choices. So basically, what am I expecting the STEM to say? The STEM's probably going to say something about abdominal pain. They're also going to give me a patient's age, a patient's name. So what would I be looking for, in this question, just what I've kind of mentioned right here? This is going to be an alcoholic, or maybe your fat, fertile female with gallbladder disease. This is going to be your hypertensive smoker. Your ischemic bowel, that's going to be another hypertensive smoker. Your appendicitis is probably going to be a younger person. And your kidney stone is going to be, your flank pain, radiates to the groin with hematuria. So basically, I would look at these and think, this is kind of what I expect the question to say above. And then I'd read the STEM. So then after I did that, I read the STEM. And then sometimes just by reading the STEM, maybe I could eliminate this one and this one. And then I'd go up and I'd just kind of read the question. So going from there, I'd read the question, then I'd eliminate, as many answer choices as I could. So, we had our A, B, C, D, E there. I read the STEM, and I felt like, D and E and C were wrong, and I was between A and B. And then I asked myself, does the question or the answer that I'm about to select answer Occam's razor? We'll talk about Occam's razor next. And if it did, I could answer Occam's razor. So let's say I said A answers Occam's razor. I'm going to choose that answer and move on. The biggest thing here being move on. I'm not going to come back to it. I'm not going to spend more time on it because I've already done all I know to do to help myself answer this question. And since I've already done all that, I know that there's nothing else I can do to try to increase the chance that I get this right. So going from there, from the top, I look at the answers first. I thought about what the question would say. Then I would kind of eliminate answers I could as I read the STEM. I'd read the whole question. After I read the whole question, I would eliminate any answers I could based off of, I know the answer or know the question needs to say X, Y, and Z for A to be correct, or I know the question needs to say, X, Y, and Z for E to be correct, and it doesn't say that, so E's wrong, those type of things. Then I ask myself Occam's razor, and we're going to go over that, and then I choose. So, what is Occam's razor? It's a thought question. A bunch of different fields of study use it, but it's basically saying that the answer choice that you're about to pick provide the most plausible clue for all the plausible answer to all the clues provided in the STEM. So, what does that mean? We're going to talk about it right here. Here's an example. This would be answering Occam's razor, and this would kind of be how I would approach board questions. So, going through it, I'd look down here at the answers. We have protease inhibitor side effect, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, Cushing's disease and syndrome, and PCOS. So, protease inhibitor side effect. So, what am I looking for in the question? I'm looking for HIV, and then I'm looking for a protease inhibitor in the question. So, if they don't have either one of these in the STEM, I'm probably not going to pick that answer. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, maybe I'm looking for some hypertension or maybe even some hypotension in a young kid. So, someone's like sub 2 almost, baby. And there are other forms of the disease which kind of can bother you as you get a little older. But for step 2, most of the time it was a young child. So I'm looking for someone that's young. If I don't see young and I don't see either one of these, I'm probably not going to pick it. Cushing's disease, PCOS, you're looking for the buffalo hump. The abdominal striae, those type things. And PCOS, you're looking for the person with amenorrhea or, problems with menstruation. Maybe they're a little overweight. Maybe they talk about a little facial hirsutism, those type things. So I did that. Now I kind of, what's the diagnosis? So we want a diagnosis, which of course they did kind of look into these questions. Then I kind of go up here and I just start reading the question. So we have a 34-year-old woman that presents with amenorrhea for 6 months and dysmenorrhea for the past 3 years. She has a BMI of 40. Increased facial hair, some acne, get an ultrasound of her ovaries, and you see multiple cysts. So, at this point in time, I'm thinking all PCOS to this point. So this is 100% PCOS from right to right here. So PCOS. So that's what I think right now. So now on physical exam, you see abdominal striae, central obesity, a buffalo hump, and a moon face. What is the diagnosis? So once again, kind of starting from the top again, they didn't mention protease inhibitors and they didn't mention HIV, so I'm going to eliminate D. They're not young, and they didn't really say much about hypertension, so I'm going to eliminate C. So now I'm between A and B, and now I have to pick between these two. When I was studying for step 1, I would have originally chosen PCOS because PCOS is drastically more common than Cushing's in real life. So I would have said PCOS is the right answer because PCOS is the most common. But PCOS does not answer Occam's razor. And remember, Occam's razor says that the answer choice that you're going to select provides the most plausible clue for all the plausible answer to all the clues provided in the stem. So plausible answer to all the clues provided in the stem. PCOS doesn't cause abdominal striae, central obesity, a buffalo hump, or a moon face. Cushing's does cause these, and it can cause signs and symptoms very similar to PCOS. So in this scenario, Cushing's would be the correct answer. That would be the answer I'd pick, and I'd kind of move on, those type things. But once again, this is the approach I used. It doesn't mean this needs to be the approach that you use, but you do need to develop your own approach, and you need to use it, and you need to use it consistently over and over and over. And once you have your own approach, you can do that to increase the amount of questions that you get correct. And by changing the approach that I used to the approach that I just showed you, I gave myself about 10%. That's what it ended up turning into. So I increased how many questions I got right out of 10 by about 10% just by changing the approach. And what did I start? I stopped missing the stupid stuff is what it was. That was stupid stuff. So basically the things that, you shouldn't miss, the oversights, basically by developing that approach, I stopped missing the oversights. And it did really help me on the hard questions. So the questions, that were like in the 20 to 40% range of people getting correct. I got more of these questions correct, as well as I stopped missing as many stupid questions. But, and then kind of where I was on the curve and how I had prepared and stuff like that, that extra 10% jumped me a pretty good bit of points, which is what I needed. So, also, kind of for our class and for our purposes, I'm going to ask a lot of individual questions where I'll kind of go down the row. I'll be sitting here in your little chairs, and I'll basically just say, hey, what do you think the answer is? And you'll say, I don't know. And then you'll get kind of nervous and you won't really like it. But what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of move down the line, and we're going to do this over and over. And the reason why is being placed on the spot puts you under stress, and it's also kind of approaching something new, which also puts you under stress, which is very similar to a board exam and very similar to the questions you get asked. A board exam will ask you a question that you don't know, and it'll put you on the spot because now it's worth something, and because of all these things, you will kind of freak out on your insides, and it actually, all that freaking out and that stress, hinders your ability to get the question right. And we want to make you the best question answer available. So to do that, we're just going to kind of practice by being on the spot a little bit in class. I'm pretty non-malignant, so it will be fun. I will do my best not to embarrass anyone on purpose. And if you do get embarrassed, and let's say you just can't stand to be asked questions in front of people, we'll find a way to skip over you and all that kind of stuff. But just come to me. So from there, when you look at a board style question, remember that the things that when they write a question with the correct answer in mind. So this is also another reason that I eliminate answer choices. So they've written this question, they've decided B is the correct answer. So the question was written out here, and all their little words that made up the stem, with B being the correct answer. So they did not actually write the question going, let's write a question where I'm going to make them eliminate A, B, C, D, and E, and just choose B because there's no good answer there. So that's not the case. They don't do that. But if you work the question as though they did, it increases the chance that you get it right, just based off the fact that you're going to eliminate answers and not choose an answer, because you're more likely to choose a wrong answer because you got a 20% chance of choosing a right answer here if you just pick one. But if you go down through here and eliminate, and let's say you eliminate E and D and C, well, now you've just increased your chance of getting it right by 50%. So, and then you kind of look at that odds. Let's say, you for sure can get 20% of the questions right on the exam. And let's say for the rest of the exam, you have 50%, you can get it to a 50-50 on every single time. And so that means you're going to get 50% of those right. So what's that? That means you're going to get about 70% of the questions right on the exam. Just by getting it to a 50-50 and then knowing that you get about 20% of the questions right. So you can get 70% questions right just by doing that, as opposed to, every other one that you don't know, you just give yourself a 20% shot because you didn't eliminate any answer choices. So once again, develop an approach. And like I said, at least from my experience, focus on choice elimination as opposed to choice selection. So, practice test. I'm going to kind of get on my little soapbox here for practice tests and why I like them. My advice to you is take every single one you can. Here are the ones offered by the Comlex for level 2. They offer you 3. So a Form A, a Form B, a Form C. They cost $55 each. It does kind of add up, but there they are, and just want to kind of show you them there. The MBO, this is supposed to be MBME. This is the MBOME, but so with that being said, so MBME. They offer, I think, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. They offer 4. So we have 4 for the MBOME, 3 for the Comlex. The USMLE in the UWorld offers, I know, at least 1 that you can buy. And why do I say purchase all these and take them? My statement is that when you take a practice test, it costs money. So you have implied a cost. So by implying a cost, it makes it worth something. This is your money that you just spent on it, and the last thing you want to do is go take $55 of cash and flush it down the toilet. So that means it means something. So it's gonna basically, it's not gonna feel good if you do good. If you do bad, so what's that? It kind of sting or hurt, is the word I like to say. So if you do pretty terrible, it's gonna sting and not feel good a little bit, and that's gonna make you try, and that's gonna make it matter, and that's gonna make you care. Sometimes we can't really do that as much with our just by working questions from our question bank. Because we purchased the question bank, we got it for a year. Sometimes we get bored and don't care, and we're just going to kind of roll through questions. So the money part makes it sting and makes it matter a little more if we do poorly. Also, it gives us our weak areas, kind of where we need to focus, and it also increases our question number. So I remember I took all 7 practice tests that were available. I took all the MBME practice tests as well as all the Comlex practice tests. Plus, I took the Comlex and I took the USMLE for like a total of 9 kind of simulated exams before I took the thing. My scores went up significantly. My USMLE score went up extremely significantly. My first practice test was for the USMLE was below the national average. So it was down below the national average, and then it went up to significantly above the national average. For the Comlex, I started a little bit above the national average, and then went up from there. But basically, with all that, what I would do was, I told y'all how I studied for the COMAT exams, but what I do for the Comlex exams was basically when I kind of hit the prime study time, I would basically take 1 month. I would take a practice test, and I would find out what my weak area was, and then for a month, I would focus on that weak area. And at the beginning of the next month, I would take another practice exam. And then I would establish a new weak area. And then I would study that weak area. And then I'd take another practice test. And then I'd have a new weak area. And then I'd take another practice test. And anyway, you see what happens over time. And this whole time I'm also studying other content and then working other random questions. And then also preparing for my COMAT exams. And so with all that being said, my scores, they kind of did this progressive incline. I will say at about the 2 to 3 month out mark, I did plateau. So my scores had gone up, and then I kind of plateaued. And this is when I changed how I approached questions. And then, I saw another increase. So basically, all that being said, is you have to be willing to change what you're doing if you realize it's not working. So it was about 2 to 3 months before my exam. So I'd been studying, for about 7 months. And then I realized that, my scores had kind of gone up, and then they kind of started to do this number. And I wasn't going up anymore. It kind of stalemated. So we had to change something. We changed something there by just how I approach questions, because I realized I was missing a lot of questions that I shouldn't miss, and then I usually didn't miss questions because I didn't know the answer, but it was more so from approach. And this is kind of where we'll kind of cover this all throughout the year, how to approach questions and that type of thing. So once again, just kind of talking about, we're kind of getting close to the end here. Thank goodness, I've been yapping for a while. But studying never goes perfect. You're never gonna feel like you're ready. But don't lose hope. So, and just keep kind of doing what you're doing every single day. Just remember the no secret ingredient thing. It's not one thing that you can do perfect to make the study process go well. But there are many things that you can do just a little bit of every single day to hopefully help you prepare. So kind of some test taking stuff. We're not going to spend a lot of time here because questions aren't written poorly anymore on real board exams. Usually they're actually written grammatically correct and all that kind of stuff. Some of the board exams that you'll run across on your question banks might be not written the best. But one thing is, just grammatical clues, making sure that all the words match up. It can help you eliminate an answer choice sometimes. Logical clues, if basically one of the answer choices includes a subset that has all the correct answers in it. So, sometimes this can be done with like age questions and stuff like that. That's once again very, very uncommon now, as kind of questions that question writers are getting better and questions are getting better. Another one is using eliminating things that say always and never, which those are absolute terms, and those are usually pretty tough. The long correct answer is the next one. This one is one that I see commonly, at least for like our Mayo quizzes and stuff like that. So one answer is significantly longer than the other answers. Pay a little more attention to it. Make sure that that it's not the right answer. I'd spend a little more time on it. Repeat words. They said the same thing in the like the stem as they did in the basically the correct answer. So sometimes that you'll see that pop up. The convergence strategy. The best way I know how to kind of tell you about this one is, this is kind of the question where you have A, you have B, you have C, you have D, you have E, and like A says something, X plus Y or Y, and let's say B says X plus C, and C says Y plus D, and D says Y plus C, and E says D plus Q. What you do here is you basically see which ones appear the most. So we have X, and X appears 1, 2. I think this is supposed to be a Y, I hope. X appears 2 times. X appears 2 times. So Y, we have appears 1, 2, 3 times. Y appears 3 times. We have C, it appears 1, 2, 2 times. So we have D, it looks like it appears 2 times, and Q, it only appears once. So with this strategy, Q only appears once, so the answer with Q in it is most likely to be an incorrect answer. So now we're left here. One of the answer choices with Y in it, which is either going to be A, I think it was C and D, are going to be the correct answer. So you're going to be choosing between one of these. So you can kind of eliminate that one. So from that one, we have X, D, and C, which all of these appeared 2 times each. So we can't converge it any further, at least for this question. But now we've eliminated 2 answers, and let's say we didn't say that the question that they answered is X, and that's just what that's all they said. They said, what is X? And this is the answer choice that they gave you. X is plus Y, yada yada yada. Basically made you read their mind. You could at least increase your chance by increase the odds that you get this one right by 40% just by eliminating these 2 answers based off this strategy. So this is something that you can use every now and then if you're completely lost. But once again, don't use poorly written questions as kind of an excuse, and this is something that I feel like we like to do a lot is, oh, that was a poorly written question, it doesn't matter, yada yada yada. It all matters, don't let this be the cause. There's always something to learn from every question of work, especially practice questions and practice exams and your question banks and stuff like that. So this is kind of how questions are written for the boards. Remember that for a board exam, basically that the question writers, they write the question, then they vote on the question, so they vote on it. So they write a question, then they vote, and they say, yay, it's good, so they give it the thumbs up. That's going to be my thumbs up sign. So then after they've written it, they voted on it, they gave it the thumbs up, then it goes under some kind of final editing, and then it gets put in as a pilot. Can't spell the word pilot, so I'll try to look down here. Maybe it's down here. P-I-L-O-T, pilot. So then it gets put in as a pilot question on one of your exams. So it's not scored, but it's there. And they find out from there what percent of people get the question right. So let's say 60% of people get this question right. After it goes back to the review folks. They review it to say, hey, do we want to make any changes to the wording? And then they say yes or no or maybe. And then it goes back to the physician/question writers. And the question writer folks look at it again and say, no, it looks pretty good. I think we need to leave it the same. They look at the comments that were made on the questions and stuff like that. And then so they vote again, and if they vote to keep it, then it goes into the test. So this is the process that happens for every question that's written for it to get in the test. It takes about, if I remember right, about a year to 2 years, maybe a year to 3 years to actually get a question from a pilot question to an actual scored question. So kind of interesting facts here. Selection style purposes, let's see, what am I trying to say here? Oh yeah, this is just the process again. Everything I just talked about there. So I remember some of the complex questions are vague. I remember hearing some of y'all say that they were starting to get longer. I think that is a push is to write longer stems so that you kind of get away from this vagueness. But each item is tested many times, and there is a correct answer. So always keep that in mind. With there being a correct answer, there's a way to get there. Don't give up on the question. Don't think that it's just a vague, bad written question, and that so you don't care about it. The question could be scored, and the question may be important. So don't give up on it. This is kind of that statement that I made, last time about the guy that makes 55s on all the tests, and he said he comes out of the exam saying he crushed it. Sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing. Board exams are hard, and they're meant to be hard. So feeling good about the exam may not be a good idea, and I'll put may not be good. I never felt good about any of my board exams. I have talked to people that do very well on board exams, and they're like, "Yeah, I think I did pretty good, man," and they did pretty good. That type thing. But it's just to realize that board exams are hard, and the questions are meant to be hard, and you don't necessarily have to feel like you rocked it socks off to have done well on the exam. So, kind of, once then, just wrapping up, here are just some resources to kind of look through. I mentioned some of this stuff, but, maybe, other things that you might run into. Here's some apps that, you can kind of use. This right here is just for the Magnolia MRHC students. So if anybody else catches this video on YouTube, and it's kind of password locked and stuff like this. These are the passwords and whatnot, but it won't work if you're not from here because there's a little code that we'll all give you and stuff like that. So, but just to go through there, this is something you can use. But it's the old Mix app. It's not the new Mix app. Remember, new Mix app is Mix app 17. And it's a new one, and we don't have a password or passcode for that one anymore. We can't all individually log into that one. Procedure Pro, that's a great procedure app. And then, just some of these other apps out here. One of the apps that I like, and they have a website, and they've kind of got their own stuff, is this Osmosis. Probably if I had to suggest one thing you get, would be a Get Osmosis. It's a question bank app. Has a lot of good questions, very affordable. And it gives you a lot of questions. So you can get, I think it's somewhere like 3,000 to 5,000 questions for just a couple $100, which is very, very good. Based off, the number of questions. Because you look at, all your other standard banks, it's usually like 2,500 questions for about $400. And this is, I think it's about 3,000 to 5,000 questions for like somewhere right around 100, 150. At least the last time I checked. The Audio Digest app that once again is kind of run through Magnolia here. This is the password, but once again you got to get the final code. So this alone will not work. But it's just something to kind of think about, and we'll talk about all that in class later. And then Case Files has free samples that you can use. Here's the old book. If you want to get the old book, I think it would be a little cheaper. The classes run around the new book, which is this one. But if you get the old book, it would probably be a little cheaper. Same content, cover the same stuff. I don't think there's anything super new in there. If you study for Step 3, this is the Step 3 book that I used. If you want to study for internal medicine, this is the internal medicine book that I use. If I had to say let's say you wanted to prepare for Step 2 and Step 3 at the same time, I get both books and I go through them together. I think it's very doable. You can prepare for Step 2 and Step 3 at the same time, and then take Step 3 as soon as your schools let you, so it can just be over with and done, and have it out of the way, and then you can focus on in-services, that type of stuff. This is a link to just a video that you need to review on kind of how to prepare for boards. It's about 15 minutes long. It's pretty good. It's produced by the Osmosis folks. Osmosis has a YouTube website as well. I would suggest you kind of subscribe there. And this is, kind of here are some other good links to go to. This is just online med ed. Great resources, great book, great videos. You can go there. The kind of Louisville lecture series. This is produced by their medicine program. Also very good here. Here are my references, and that really does this for the whole PowerPoint. But I did want to show you all this video. It's kind of the video that basically started this whole med school studying process. And I saw this kind of as I entered it was the end of my first year. I found this video. It kind of started popping up on a few little things that I looked at for kind of learning stuff and kind of how to prepare for stuff. And I saw this video, and it's kind of inspiring, I guess would be the word. It's produced by Khan Academy. And anyway, just take a look.
Nobody's born smart. We all start at zero. Can't talk, can't walk, certainly can't do algebra. Adding, reading, riding a bike? Nobody's good at anything at first. There was a time when Einstein couldn't count to 10. And Shakespeare had to learn his ABCs just like the rest of us. Thankfully, we're born to learn. Slowly, surely, you stumble, slip, crawl, fall, and fail and fall. Frustrating, confusing, trying, struggling, until one day, you walk. One foot in front of the other, one idea on top of the next, each wrong answer making your brain a little bit stronger. Failing is just another word for growing, and you keep going. This is learning. Knowing that you'll get it, even if you haven't gotten it yet. Because the most beautiful, complex concepts in the whole universe are built on basic ideas that anyone, anywhere, can understand. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you only have to know one thing. You can learn anything.
All right, so that's going to kind of wrap up the talk here. And that's also Khan Academy. And that's also my plug for Khan Academy. I like Khan Academy. Great website overall. You can kind of get your own little account there and do whatever. Watch videos. They have medicine videos and stuff too. So with all that being said, that'll wrap us up. And thank y'all. It's a little long. I would watch it at like the 1.5 times speed and probably break this up over a couple sit down sessions. I apologize for that. But anyway, thank you and have a good one.